Yes.
Great. Welcome to this discussion of these international standards. My co-presenter, Maryse Benhoff, is in transit, stuck in traffic, and she'll be joining us at some unpredictable moment, and we'll turn it over to her. The two standards that we'd like to focus on are the general translation standards from these two international standards bodies that deal with any kind of translation. And both have been updated or are being updated very recently. The ASTM standard, which I will begin with, was published, a new version of it was published just a few months ago in February 2023. But it's not a brand new standard. It's the second update of a standard that was first published in 2006 and then was revised according to changes in the translation sector, again in 2014, and now a major update in 2023. So I'm going to assume that most of you are not very familiar with ASTM standards. So I'll give just a very brief background on that. ASTM is an international standards body. Its business is to create standards. In that sense, it's like ISO. It is, by some measures, bigger than ISO, and it is actually older, although it started out as an American standards body, but then a number of years ago rebranded as ASTM International. It actually started back in the middle of the 1800s when the railroad was being built across the United States, and they needed to have multiple suppliers for railroad ties and various pieces of the railroad, and they all had to fit together properly. And this wasn't happening. So they developed industrial standards so that those materials that they received had been tested and found to meet tensile requirements, strength, and so on, purity. It has been expanded and expanded to many, many types of standards. And in some recent years, there's a language technology and language teaching, all kinds of language standards in Technical Committee F, as in Frank 43. I've been involved in this effort, but only since approximately the year 2001, so about 22 years. This standard that's just recently been updated is interesting in that it is not focused on the provider of translations uniquely. It's also talking about the requester of services, and it does not assume that there is an existing relationship between the requester and the provider. As a matter of fact, there's a section on selecting a translation service provider. Now, it does have a section, a crucial section, section 5, that talks about the needs analysis. And this can be done before or after the requester of translation services has selected a provider. And here's where they have to ask themselves, well, really, what are my needs? What kind of translation do I need? Who is my intended audience? Why am I even translating? What kind of content am I translating? And what are the risks involved in the errors in correspondence? Now, correspondence errors and fluency errors are the two very basic umbrella types of errors that are discussed in the standard. Correspondence includes both accuracy, which has been used for many, many years, accuracy between the source and the target, on the one hand, and terminology. So something can be accurate in a general language sense, but still use terminology that's not what is requested, which is not in the specifications. And specifications is a huge part of this standard. There's a section 8, which is all about standardizing the parameters. Now, the parameters are the questions that are asked, and the specifications are the answers that are given for the particular use case at hand. This is a new feature of this update to talk about, very specifically talk about the use case, talk about what kind of translation is needed, and whether there is a tolerance for errors if you can't have it all. If you can't have it fast enough, cheap enough, and with no errors in correspondence and fluency then being the target language text as a document on itself, in and of itself. If you can't have it all, then where are you willing to compromise? Are you willing to spend more? Are you willing to allow more time rather than an instant translation? If you can't wait, well, are you willing to accept a different service level, which includes a different grade of translation? Now, grade here is defined as the minimum requirement for correspondence between source and target and fluency of the target text. This is actually highly relevant to neural machine translation, which is on the same technology that is used in the AI generative systems like ChatGPT. The very important question is, well, what if it's very fluent? It reads very well. And most people have noticed these days that the output from neural machine translation and ChatGPT can read very nicely, but talk about things with a lot of confidence that don't even exist. Things up. And in the context of translation, neural machine translation, you can have a very smooth target text that has seemingly random, unpredictable errors in correspondence. So the question that the user of this standard is asked is, well, what are the risks involved in errors in correspondence that a professional human translator teamed up with a professional reviser would not likely make? This Four Eyes team that has been embodied in other international standards like ISO 17100, which many of you are probably familiar with. In this particular service level, if these errors would probably not be made, but yet in raw machine translation, there you might have those errors, and you actually might not be detectable just by reading the output. So fluency in the target language and a fluent output may not be enough. This question of risk management is new in this 2023 edition of the standard, but in my opinion, it's crucial to all translation standards from here on out, because we can no longer assume that every translation we see has been carefully translated by a professional human translator and revised by another professional who has at least the qualifications of a professional translator and probably has been and has advanced to being a reviser. You can no longer assume that this is happening behind the scenes for everything that you receive or consume. Here we're taking the notion of a consumer, an end user being a consumer of translation. Where does it come from? We're not so sure anymore if it doesn't have an explicit source produced by this individual translator who takes responsibility, or this particular translation company. Then where does it come from? This introduces a new notion that is not in the previous edition of the ASTM standard about labels, consumer protection labels. This is at the very end of the standard. After the production has happened, whatever that production method is, the end user doesn't know what went on. They don't know even about the production, the method of production. They just typically just know that they've got a translation. Well, the standard recommends that every translation have a label. And the labels here are UMT and BRT, which stand for unedited machine translation on the one hand, and BRT, bilingually reviewed translation on the other. Now, these are not simply raw machine translation versus professional human translation that meets all the requirements of initial translation and revision. Those two extremes, certainly raw machine translation falls under UMT, unedited machine translation, and ISO 17100 level translation falls under BRT, bilingually reviewed translation. But there are other types of processes that are happening these days that also fall into one or the other. In particular, there's a review, a monolingual review of a raw machine translation without ever looking back at the source to make sure that it corresponds completely. And this is also, even though there's a human involved, it's still classified under unedited machine translation. There is no bilingual editing by a professional human who is qualified to do so. Then there's also human translation where there is no second pair of eyes, which also happens these days. And that's classified under bilingually reviewed translation, where the B, or bilingually, is crucial. So what it really boils down to is whether there's been a validation of the correspondence between source and target by a professional human. Raw machine translation cannot be labeled, is not allowed to be labeled as bilingually reviewed translation, even if a machine translation system using this brand new quality estimation AI thing has looked at it. That doesn't give you the confidence that a bilingual review by a human does. So the question of this new edition of the standard, there's also a question of, well, is it only an American standard, or is it intended to be used internationally? Definitely it's intended to be used internationally, and we would very much like some feedback. And you're probably asking yourself a question, well, what about the ISO standards in this area? The one that we'll be discussing in a few minutes.
Alan, we can't hear you. Your microphone seems to be muted.
Been silent, Barbara. Just now? Okay. Can you hear me again?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. There was quite a bit of background noise. I imagine that you muted some people, and that's what happened there. Okay.
And we cannot see you either, Alan. Would you please switch on your camera?
Well, I can see myself, so let's see here. Can you see me now?
Yes, we can see you. We can hear you.
Okay, good. So let me now ask you a question. Has Maryse joined the session yet?
Not yet.
Not yet. Well, then I think I'll start discussing the ISO standard in this area very briefly and take some questions, hoping that she will arrive soon. The sister standard to the ASTM F2575 is perhaps surprisingly to some of you, is not ISO 17100. The closest relative is the upcoming new edition of ISO 11669, which is a guidance standard. And perfect timing. Maryse, you just showed up. I'd just given an overview of the ASTM standard, and I said that I would just introduce the ISO standard until you showed up, and here you are. Thank you so much. I'll turn it over to you, and I'm going to mute.
Right on time. Well, we will come back to it. I'm going to. I'd like to share my screen, and I think I should be able to do that fairly quickly. Translating Europe. No, that's not the one I want. And sorry about that. So, have you sold everyone on the ASTM? Hello?
Questions yet, so I have no idea. But I did say that the closest relative, closest family member is 11669. And I believe that they are a nice, happy family. But that's for you to tell us.
Well, I did find, and I'm desperately trying to open my PowerPoint, but it's just not wanting to open. I don't know why, because I'm on screen and there's plenty of people watching. That's why. All right. So we're going to kind of go backwards a little bit before we go forwards, if I can ever get it up and rolling. I don't know why the technology is just not following today. All right. Sorry about this. everyone. I'm sure you don't want to see a picture of ourselves. Nope, don't want to see that either. I don't know.
Maryse, you can send me your presentation and I can try to share it from my computer in case it doesn't open anytime soon. Maryse, your microphone is off. Alan, I think we might have lost Maryse. Would you mind continuing?
So would you like me to channel Maryse?
We'll try this one more time.
I'll give it a try.
Maybe it'll maybe we
So-
can actually participate.
Oh, here we go. Maryse is coming back.
Is it possible that I'm not allowed to share my content?
Is your PowerPoint presentation open already on your screen?
It absolutely is.
And what happened once you clicked on the share button?
Nothing. It showed me something else. So it's not very
Showed me something.
really not.
When you click on the second tab where there's window, you can choose one of the windows that are open.
I found it. There we go.
Yes.
Okay. So ASTM obviously, yes, it is also fairly new as well, but the 11669 has just been reviewed, completely revamped, and to the better. And you've been involved with that as well, right, Alan? You've been heavily involved with that. Okay, I don't know if you can hear me. So I'm just stepping back for a moment. I'm just stepping back a minute just to reposition us. Okay, so there's many standards in TC37 SC5, and of course there's the newly minted 11669. But there's a very long list of standards that have been developed, which I'm not going to make everyone's eyes glaze over, but I am going to give you the overview of it so that you can see what what all we do, and then we'll come back around to the 11669. And this is not a shameless plug for my company. It's just to say that we are a company that also supports standards, but all the people that work in standards are volunteers. This is also an invitation to anyone who wants to be involved in standards, who would like to have a voice in standards or standardization, to get involved and to contact your National Standards Board and to ask to become part of the Mirror Committee. And I hope we're reaching a lot of people here. So I had to put this out there. You know, a lot of people don't know who actually makes standards. It's not this organization called ISO. It's an organization of professionals that come together to create standards. So it's linguists, it's translators, interpreters. It's specialists in every field, right? So you too, if you work in this field, you too can participate in this work. And I highly encourage you to, because this is the standards, in my view, pave the way to the future of our industry. And so being involved with standards is giving yourself license to help design the future in your industry. I'm jumping because I know that we're very short on time. So there are many committees in TC 37. SC5 is what we're concerned with. And SC5 has been busy over the past 10, 12 years with starting in 2012. There were standards being created before, and 11669 was one of the first that was created, amongst now with many others. There are 34 participating countries in the work that we do. There are 16 observing members. And there's room for many more countries because there's 196 countries in ISO. So if you're from a country that is not on this list and is not on this list, I highly suggest that you contact your National Standards Board to become involved. There are liaison organizations, many of the top international organizations that help also by giving comments. We have 18 published standards, 12 under development, and we have many more that need to get done. So the newly minted is 11669, and I will not read this list out. This will be available to everyone. I'm going to give it to the organizers so that they can circulate this information. And you also will have reference to all the different standards, where you can find them, where you can buy them, how they apply. But tomorrow we'll talk about how they apply in much more detail. So with this list of standards in this field, the message here is that you need to know that there are all these standards in your field in order to know what's coming. And you need to know about it, because if there's bids put out with these standards in them and you don't even know what the standard is, you will not know how to be able to bid. You're at a loss from the get-go. So I preach far and wide that everyone should be involved and should know about all the standards that are in our industry and eventually will become incumbent upon you as a professional in this industry. So I think that with this list, oops, I'm going backwards. Sorry about that. Didn't want to make the list look longer. Is now we can take it back to the ASTM, which is a regional standard for the USA, big region, and the 11669, which is ISO and has had the input of all the specialists from all over the world, including Alan as well. So I will stop at this, and 11669, I mean, from the work that's been done, I feel that it has taken so much more from all parts of the world and put it into a very nicely written standard that is good for clients as well as for professionals. Also, I'm sure it can be used by universities to help students understand what's out there, what's coming. And I will stop at that, Alan. I will stop sharing. And I wanted to ask you, Alan, about how you feel now about the regionalism of the standard, the ASTM, because the ASTM is really for the USA. Did we lose Alan now?
Well, let's see. Can you hear me?
I can, Alan. I can hear you fine. But now you're muted. Let's try again. Alan, could you please try and switch on your mic?
I see there's some chat going on in the chat room too.
There is indeed.
Yes,
And the
there is.
Q&A session will start soon. We have 3 last minutes.
Very good. So my question to Alan was really to get his opinion on what he finds to be the major difference with the regional version of the ASTM versus the international version of the ISO 11669. So Alan, if you can hear me, that's my question to you. What is the specificity for the US version, if you have one? I think we've lost him.
I think we have to.
The ASTM standard
Oh, there you are.
is an international standard. So thanks for baiting me and saying, oh, it's just a US standard. From the perspective of the team that developed it, and especially the latest edition, it is intended to be used all over the world. Now, what is US specific? Well, there are a couple subsections about selecting translators, and it refers to proficiency guidelines for language proficiency that are US specific. But I would say it's maybe 50 words that are US specific. But and now maybe we can have a little debate. From my perspective, that's really just a tiny little part that's US specific. And we've had interactions lately with the UK based ALC, Association. Let's see the language. What is the company there in the UK that brings together the the companies, translation companies in the UK, and ATC, is it? Association of Translation Companies.
Yes.
And they're taking a look at it, and they're thinking, hey, this really does it.
Oh my goodness, technology is really a struggle. How does
that shock you, Maryse?
I lost you. I lost you. You disappeared for a moment. Anyways, from my screen, so I didn't hear what you said. But does it shock me that ATC is interested in?
I don't see your video. Can you hear me, Maryse?
Now I can.
No? Okay. Barb, our master, can you hear me?
Yes, Alan, I can hear you.
Okay. So you feel, or you found that it's being implemented in other countries as well?
Let's see.
It's very difficult. Barbara, it seems that Alan can't hear my questions.
I think he can. Alan, can you hear us? We can hear you, but can you hear us?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, somehow I don't think he's hearing my questions. But maybe it's just time to turn it over to questions. We have a Q&A. We have 10 minutes for Q&A. And I think that there's probably a lot of people with plenty of questions.
Okay, let me read out the first one. I'll start from the end, from the most recent one. How does the USA standard evaluate a professional from Europe?
So that would be Alan who needs to respond.
Outside the United States. Well, okay, here's a question. How does the US standard, well, let's say the ASTM standard, how does it evaluate a professional from Europe? Okay, well, that's a fair question. Let's see what it says in that section. Selecting a translation service provider. So it says factors. translation competence. It lists the translator's competency, the ability, translation ability, years of experience, number of years studying translation is a factor. Degree in translation is one that counts. A competency-based certification, and not from an American necessarily, from American Translators Association, but it says, and I quote, in the spirit of ISO 17024, which was put in this new edition to specifically make it an international competency approach. So, and Maryse, feel free to contradict my claim here that it really is.
No, I read it in depth. I read the standard in depth. But what I find could possibly hinder someone who would be buying this standard is that the ASTM standard is that they need to then go and get the 17024 in order to know what all that encompasses. Whereas perhaps, maybe in a later version, a chunk out of the actual elements would be interesting to put in so that your reader wouldn't have to go elsewhere. I mean, that's just a personal opinion. I wouldn't want to have to buy another standard in order to understand my standard, the standard that I want to use.
That's an excellent point. So then the next item is translation skills tested, or a testing company, but refer to where in the world that would, and reference sample translations. Actually, it's somewhat similar to the section on translator competence in 1169. How do you determine or at least take a good guess as to whether the translator is competent in 11669?
Well, you worked on it, so why don't you tell us? I know you worked on it.
Hey, well, I'll pull it out.
You're the one who created the first one, so go ahead and tell us.
All righty. So well, I'm actually going to look up that section. Let's look at some of the other questions.
Yeah.
The slides.
Okay, let me read it out for you. There was a participant saying that, or asking whether ISO 18587 should not be revised because this standard confuses human translation with post-editing, apparently. And then we had a discussion about it in the chat with somebody else saying he doesn't agree with that. Could you comment on it, please?
It's on the horizon, so there will be a revision of it, and the team is being assembled. I would say that's the truth of what's happening within the committee. And that comment was from Jacob Absalom. And Jacob, I really do welcome you to join us at ISO doing this work, because if you have a lot of experience and can lean in on this, I think you'd be an excellent addition. Reach out to your mirror committee, your national standards body, and ask to become a member on the mirror committee, because there's a lot of work to be done. And with all the standards that we do have presently, there's a lot of maintenance to do. And so every 5 years they come up for review. And so some need a full overhaul, like the 11669 got a very big overhaul from where it started. So it's correct to say that 18587 needs a review, and we saw it. We're on it. It will begin. We could take another question.
Perhaps one last question, because we have 3 minutes left.
Yeah, quick.
there's a
respond.
question or a final remark from our speakers. Now is the time.
Yes. Can you hear me, Barbara?
Yes, I can hear you, Alan.
Yes. So it's in section 5.4 of 11669. And so here it's interesting. Selecting a translation provider. It's important that the work be done by competent language professionals, and to see the competencies, please acquire ISO 17100. So it doesn't even
There
list
we
them
go. There
in as
we
much
go.
detail as the ASTM standard.
Right. However, to the defense of 11669, all the terminology is the same. So, but I see. Yeah, you're right. So it's referring to 17100 because it's clearly identified, just as in the ASTM, to refer to this other one because there's a point chunked out. But perhaps we want to in the future add it in because every 5 years we're going to do this anyways. Yeah.
As I think that I'd like to make a closing statement that if you're wondering whether these two standards are compete or actually whether they are complementary and could be used together, since I've been involved in both, I would say that there's been a lot of work on these two standards, this ISO and this ASTM, to avoid any real contradictions or clashes. As a matter of fact, there have been joint task forces that have been created along the way over the last few years between ISO and ASTM to avoid any serious clashes, because that would really be bad for the whole translation sector to have these new translation standards that say directly different things. So I'd say choose one
No, they don't say
and enjoy it, or look at both and then combine them.
To be fair, there's often companies in a country who will want ISO or they will want an ASTM because their governance board wants ASTM standards, and another governance board might want ISO standards. So it's not incongruent. Canada, where I'm from, has standards that mimic 17100 or not mimic but run parallel. It does have Canadianisms in them, but and that's specifically the case in Canada, where we've got a very large buyer who uses the national standard. So I'm sure it can come up in that way in the US as well or elsewhere. So thank you, Alan, for bringing this up. And
Maryse, and thank you, Barbara.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. And I think we're out of time. I think ding, ding, ding. We're out on that time.
We are indeed. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you for this useful session, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, and everyone else as well. We'll see you all tomorrow.
Yep.
Thank you.